Hi, this is a YouTube video in the series What's Wrong with the World and How to Fix It. I'm Terry Lay. I'm calling this one Liberal Feminism and the Socialist Critique, and I'm going to, I'm doing two videos on the relationship between capitalism or the market economy and patriarchy, and like the gendered power of men, if you like. So kind of why am I doing this as a sort of cis male talking about issues that I mean, I'm a privileged person within the context of patriarchy, and so on. So one reason is that as a sociologist, I think these are really important issues. I mean, these are fundamental structures of inequality in this society and other societies, which inevitably of interest to sociologists. And also because I think there are various reasons why men should support feminism. Especially I'll talk about that more in the next talk. Okay, so you may have heard the term liberal feminism, and I mean it's liberal in the sense of John Stuart Mill. It means an approach which is sympathetic to the ideals of the market economy and the Enlightenment and individual freedom and so on. The aim is to create gender equality in the context of a market or capitalist economy. So the kind of things that liberal feminists talk about are things like childcare and state support for childcare, contraception and abortion rights for women, gendered sexual assault, domestic violence, obviously, the glass ceiling, which makes it hard for professional women to, and business women to get up into high positions compared to men. Pay rates at in every class and niche of society. Men's jobs tend to get paid more than women's jobs, and men get paid more and get more money because women are out of the labour market for longer and so on. Equal participation in the labour market, so that's what I just talked about, really. Equal housework, that men should share housework and childcare. The equal representation of women in politics and business. So these are the kind of issues which you may well say these are the kind of issues which feminists of any kind are involved in. And I mean, that'd be true, but insofar as if you open up a mainstream middle of the road newspaper today, you'll see lots of articles and pieces which support these feminist goals in the context of assuming that a market economy is fine and that women can progress within the context of a market economy. And so liberal feminists believe that it's not necessary to overthrow capitalism to get women's liberation. That's an archaic phrase, which I'm happy to use. Okay, so I mean, in classics of liberal feminism would be Betty Friedan, The Feminine Aesthetic. That would be a really good introduction if you want to find out what they think. The socialist critique of liberal feminism, which has basically been around pretty well since liberal feminism has been talked about. And a recent book is Nancy Fraser's book, Feminism for the 99%. And so, okay, the first critique of liberal feminism is that in practice, these kind of strategies and this kind of push by liberal feminists has meant that elite women are doing well out of this, and they get various positions, and sometimes they become femnocrats, or, like, in other words, bureaucrats in public positions. But most women are actually suffering from the problems created by neoliberalism, like the capitalism, late capitalism, the economy of late capitalism, the casualisation of paid work, which means they can't get full-time, long-term paid jobs and their husbands can't. Low pay, like really low rates of pay, not much movement in pay in the lower sections of society since the 1970s. Housing affordability, jumped through the roof in many countries, and certainly Australia's an awful example. The cost of medical care going up through the roof. Education, huge, very hard to get into university and pay fees and so on. Childcare, the cost of childcare, the fact that the unavailability, and in many countries the state doesn't really support preschool childcare at all. Poor working conditions for a lot of employed women. male bosses who sexually harass women at work. These are all kind of like issues for ordinary women, you know, like and women, you know, marginalized ethnic identities, you know, black women in America and so on. And then the socialist the critique goes on to say that one of the evil effects of liberal feminism is that elite women pay ordinary women to solve the gender problems in elite families. You know, like, so if the husband won't do the housework or childcare, you pay a nanny, you pay domestic workers and so on. And these people are a casualized workforce paid on very low rates. In the case of the United States, they're often illegal migrants who don't have any kind of possibility of exercising union power and so on and so forth. And then here's another view, a comment from socialist critiques of liberal feminism, that it's not men who benefit from women's unpaid labour. You know, like, in other words, the husbands of working class women would like to see their wives paid more money when they're out in the workforce and so on. And the low paid jobs are not benefiting working class families and so on. But who are they benefiting? They're benefiting the capitalist class. You know, so that, like, the capitalism depends, and, like, let's even assume that, you know, the woman's staying at home for the first 5 years of the kid's life and not getting much paid work and so on, and she's out of the labour market and so on. So who's benefiting from all of that unpaid work? Well, the capitalist depends upon these future citizens who will become employees. The capitalist depends upon the husband being looked after at home and so on. So there's this whole argument that actually it's the capitalist class that benefit from women's unpaid labour. I'll come back to that because that's one of the points where I disagree with socialist critiques of this type. And then, you know, you can go on to suggest that the aim of the capitalist class is to divide and rule the working class via sort of gender identity politics, you know, like that. So women are, you know, these working class families or underclass families are kind of like in a totally impossible situation because of neoliberalism, and so they tear themselves apart in sort of gender conflicts. And this prevents any kind of political organisation and sort of class solidarity. And so they conclude that women's problems cannot be solved without overthrowing capitalism. So in this first talk, I'm going to give an overview of my perspective on this and a kind of account of how I see capitalism and patriarchy being related in the core countries and the rich countries. So I think there are some problems and some degrees of truth in both of these perspectives, the liberal feminist perspective and the socialist critique. My own account of these issues is influenced by what's called radical feminism, and people may think of that as terse, you know, trans-excluding radical feminists, but it has a much more older root in the early second wave, and it has nothing necessarily to do with any of that stuff, which is basically that men create and benefit from patriarchy, that in a sense, it's that men as a class organise together to create gendered inequality and the oppression of women and so forth. And this is a trans-historical and cross-cultural phenomenon. It's not just restricted to capitalist societies and so on. And so, okay, so this leads to what's called dual systems theory. You know, like, in other words, it's called dual because there's two basic systems operating in capitalism. One is the sort of system of social classes and the market economy of capitalism. That's one system. And the other system is patriarchy, the power of men in relationship to women. And that these systems interact. And this is not unique, that the same thing happened in feudal society, that feudal society and patriarchy interact and so on and so forth. So we'll talk about that more. You know, and it's true, the socialist critique is true to this extent, that ruling class men embody the ideals of patriarchy in a way that working class men could only dream of. So it's all very well, you know, I don't know, you know, getting drunk and having a fight in the pub or whatever. But really, if you want real power, you should be someone like Jeff Bezos or you know, Elon Musk or whatever. These people have real power in society. In a sense, they can buy anything that creates status within a masculinist patriarchal hierarchy. And also you could argue that sometimes the sort of hegemonic behavior of working class men is compensatory, you know, like because we can't have this, we'll have something else, you know, like underclass minor criminal behavior or whatever. It's also true that men in each class and socioeconomic niche are advantaged by patriarchy. So the truth of the radical feminist viewpoint is that it doesn't matter what social class or niche you're in, you know, whether it's underclass, working class, you know, marginalized, black, whatever, men have more power in those class niches. This would be the point of view of radical feminism, that men benefit from patriarchy in relation to women of their own social class niche. And I talk about this in earlier videos and explain what I mean by all of that. Okay, so now in view of this sort of dual systems theory, I'm going to now talk about pre-capitalist feudal societies of Europe, you know, like the societies from which capitalism first arose, right? And then talk about how the patriarchal structure of these societies changed with the development of capitalism and what it's like now. So this is in the first talk. So first of all, in feudal societies, there was the cultural hegemony of patriarchy. In other words, this was the dominant mainstream culture of the times, was patriarchal, like that religion was patriarchal, that men could officiate as priests and you know, popes and whatever, and women were not permitted to do that. And there were sort of customary beliefs, like the idea that a woman who had any control or, you know, over a husband was referred to as a scold, you know, like, and that was a bad thing. In other words, she's someone who sort of talks back and has things to say and makes decisions and so on. And to the extent to which that it was regarded as absolutely and perfectly legitimate for men to beat their wives if their wives were not obedient, you know, like, and even in the religion backed up the idea that women should be subservient to their husbands. And I mean, that's still true in the Anglican Church today in Australia. I mean, anyway, but let's say that it's not generally acceptable within current society, where certainly in feudal society, that was how men gained control and maintained control. And a husband who was being ordered around by his wife and not behaving appropriately as a man could be subjected to some kind of stigmatizing ritual, like, for example, riding backwards on a donkey while people shouted insults at them. And also, what one could talk about the unequal hours of work of women and men in feudal society, unequal division of labour in terms of hours of work, the monotony of the work, men's mobility in their work, moving around the countryside and so on. The authority, like the men would have authority in situations where women were involved in work and so on. But at the same time as this was true, feudal society was one in which women had recognized productive roles, you know, and economic power through that. So, for example, if a husband died, the wife could take over the business as the widow and run the business, right? These things all changed with the development of capitalism. That women had recognized professional roles, like as midwives or herbalists, and like even the role of nuns as sort of independent women to some extent, running their own show. I mean, all of these things were an aspect of feudal society and sort of built into the structure of it. There wasn't the same kind of emphasis on women as delicate, you know, like, or as asexual. Women are expected to be sexual. I mean, you know, even to the point of being dangerous because of their sexuality and so on. Again, quite different from early capitalist societies in Europe. And what we could say about this is that one of the things that was going on was that production was in the home, in the place. Oh, just one thing I just wanted to say about that. If you want to get an idea of what this might have been like, Chaucer's, you know, the Canterbury Tales are an interesting source on this stuff. So yeah, coming back to what I was saying. So production is in the home. There's a complementarity of unpaid work. You know, the way in which the feudal ruling class would get a surplus would be by extracting tribute in kind. You know, like I said, like looking in a previous video, like looking after the Lord's dog pack and feeding it, or by more usually by giving some of their wheat crop, you know, their cereal crop to the Lord of the manor. Now, in this situation, you know, men were not working for money, and their wives were not working for money as well. So domestic work and work, you know, in the cottage, you know, weaving or whatever, was all part of productive work done by the couple, you know, as a family or whatever, or an extended family in some cases. And yet at the same time, you know, as this complementarity in the economy, men were dominating in religion. I've talked about that. In politics, men, you know, in the military, you know, like it was armies of men that were fighting each other, despite Joan of Arc, you know, like mostly it was men who were actually out there with weapons, killing each other and dominating politics through that. And so despite some, you know, some inheritance situations where, you know, a male heir didn't come through, and so if a female heir was chosen as a queen or whatever, abbess or something like that, like, yeah, okay, so despite those situations, men were generally dominant. Okay, so that was what feudal society was like. So now let's look at how that changed in capitalist patriarchy. And this is like what was the intersection, if you like, between the capitalist market economy and patriarchy. And I did my master's thesis years ago on women's roles in 19th century England. So I looked at quite a lot of the original documents from this period, and this rave now is informed by that as well as by various other writers like Elie Zaretsky, a political economy writer. And then of course, the dual systems theorists themselves like Heidi Hartmann and Batya Weinbaum. Excellent work on this period. So as Zaretsky points out, capitalism separates paid work outside the home from unpaid domestic work. And in a sense, this comes also from Weber's writing. And why did they do this? Because they wanted control over the paid work. The ownership of the means of production became privatized, and the way you would make money out of the means of production was by producing more stuff and marketing and selling it and making a profit through that and extracting surplus value and so on. So in order to facilitate this, the capitalist class, for example, cottage weavers were brought together in big factories well before that machines were introduced, and then that work was controlled by machines and facilitated and made more productive by machinery. So the industrial work, the productive work, you know, certain kinds of work, let's just call it certain kinds of work. That's probably a better way to look at it. Were taken away. The kinds of work where you could make a profit by selling things on the market were taken out of the home, and the workers were much more closely controlled and supervised by the capitalist owners and so on. Now, what did that mean? It meant that the work that was left over it suddenly became something different. It was unpaid domestic work. Now, in this context, there was a threat, if you like, to patriarchy. What was the threat? The threat was that women, especially young women, you know, like in the family, being ordered around by their fathers and brothers and so on, would leave home and get a job in a factory or, you know, in one of these capitalist enterprises and businesses and become independent, financially independent. Right, and Batya Weinbaum talks about this quite a lot, and I think she's absolutely right about it. And so there was a threat that women would be paid and become independent of male power as paid workers. And what we can see in you know, 18th and 19th century England in particular as a leading industrial country, and it would have gone on in the rest of Europe as well, is that this alternative was resisted massively by a cross-class, you know, like including the working class and the capitalist class, or the middle class, if you like, alliance of men. Right, and working on kind of different issues, but coming to the same, a similar conclusion, which was to do two things: drive down women's wages in paid work, so men were always being paid more. And secondly, to relegate women to the domestic sphere so that men didn't do domestic work. That was the preserve of women. They were kept out of the labour market and out of paid work for a large part of their lives. So this was an alliance of trade unions, you know, men's trade unions advocating that men's work be regarded as skilled work and paid at a higher rate. And middle-class reformers, you know, often religious, you know, Protestant, extreme Protestant reformers wanting a more moral society who oppose women working in factories because it would lead to immorality. They were scared that you know, there was a lot of talk about half-naked women in coal mines, you know, dragging large carts of coal around and things like that. Oh my God, you know, like, okay, so there was an attempt to sort of moralize women and keep them in the home. So men used the power they already had in feudal societies, you know, like the power of men in parliament, for one thing, you know, totally male preserve, and the power of men in trade unions to prevent the option of women gaining equal power through paid work. So there was higher paid for men, skilled work became men's work, and men's work, you know, like men's work became skilled work and so on. The Factory Acts to bar women and children from various kinds of paid work and so on. This related to another whole phenomenon, which I've sort of alluded to it, but I'm now going to talk about it in more detail, or what I shall call the moral economy of capitalist patriarchy. So the role of women in the moral economy of capitalist patriarchy is as God's police, the moral mother. Ruth Bloch talks about this, the rise of the moral mother, the innocent child versus the man of the world. So women's role was to socialize the young child into the virtues associated with Protestantism, you know, like honesty, tell the truth, you know, don't steal. You know, these are somewhat obvious things, but also sexual abstinence until marriage, and you know, like all of the Protestant virtues, the hard work, yeah, of course, hard work, a very important one, and so the role of the moral mother was to instill these virtues in the children and the unformed, you know, child who you know, who needed to be controlled and brought up to be like this. Okay, so that was the role of the moral mother, and this fitted with the necessity of capitalism to be backed up by the Protestant work ethic. I mean, Weber, you know, the Protestant work ethic and the spirit of capitalism. I mean, it wasn't just the work ethic; the whole package of Puritanism, the repression of desire, which was associated with Puritanism, was, you know, music to the ears of the new capitalist class and particular sections of that class. So this moral mother, you know, like started off in the upper class and the middle class, and gradually through various campaigns and so on, this kind of way of looking at things and this attempt to create a gendered regime of this type kind of moved down the class scale to by the 1900s and 1920s in the rich countries. A large number of working class ordinary women were staying home unpaid, looking after their children for at least the first 5 years, if not longer. You know, in Australia, the Harvester judgment, I think it was 1917, was all about what wage is necessary for a man to support his wife living at home looking after the kiddies. And you know, and married women were not allowed to be public servants. Oh, I mean, all of this stuff, right? It all relates to that, and all came about with this whole package. This leads to a kind of yeah, like I'm going to talk about the myth of Little Red Riding Hood, right? Anne Cranny Francis writes about this, and I really think it's very interesting to think of this pattern in terms of that. Okay, so in the Little Red Riding Hood, the hunter's really the good guy, right? He looks after the grandma and Red Riding Hood by coming to their rescue and dispatching the evil wolf. And the evil wolf's this sort of rampaging wild beastie who's out there trying to eat everybody, eat all these women, you know, like Little Red Riding Hood and grandma and so on. Now, what Granny Francis points out is that this mythology is a mythology about masculinity in current capitalist patriarchy. Yeah, like it's like, you know, men's sexuality has to be controlled. Like the good man controls their sexuality and they're not, and they're kind to women. They look after women and they protect them, you know, from these evil men out there who can't control their evil lusts and so on. So what we can also see is that this is a sort of metaphor for the economic structure of capitalist patriarchy. Okay, so we've got the husbands who are out there earning a wage, or earning a much higher wage than their wives and so on. Like, you know, men earn more than, like, double what women earn in the life course and so on, done on average, right? Quite significant. So in a sense, in terms of the economy, men are out there dealing with the economy and bringing home the dough and kind of protecting women, right? That's their role. That's the good man, right? Meanwhile, don't forget the wolf. Okay, so who's the wolf in this? The wolf is men in general, you know, not the husband of a particular woman and so on, but men in general control political life in a way that says to women, unless you're attached to a husband, don't expect any help from us. Society will not come to your assistance. There's no way to bring up a child without the support of a husband. You know, it's a good cop, bad cop routine, right? And it's like, yeah, Alan Willis uses that term, and I think it's very relevant to this economic structure. That's exactly how it operates. So men are protecting their wages and private property in the economy against women. You know, like, in other words, you get a wage, you own that money, right? You know, you're not giving it. It's not available to any you know, woman out there who might be having a hard time. No, right? No, it's yours, right? It's, and this kind of it's like it runs through the whole of capitalist patriarchy. It's reflected in ideas about unsafe spaces. You know, women don't go out at night and don't go out alone at night because it might be dangerous and so on and so on. And the whole mythology of sexual assault. Oh, I couldn't control myself, you know, like, it's like I'm the wolf in this context, you know, like that's how it's all kind of viewed. But as the term good cop, bad cop suggests, what it actually means for women is that they're just in much as much, in fact, a lot more danger from the men in their families who have economic power over them, to whom, you know, they're dependent on these men, especially when the kiddies are young. How this all hangs together now in the course. So I'm going to finish this talk now with this discussion. And like, this is like my reply, if you like, in detail to the socialist critique. It's true that capitalists may depend upon women's unpaid labour. They do, you know, but they depend on it just like they depend upon free air and free water and all of these environmental services. In other words, these are things they don't have to pay for, that are prior to the exploitative relationship of the firm, which is about paying people who are workers in money and making more money than you pay them. You know, okay, so that in a sense, it's true that women's unpaid labour is absolutely necessary to capitalism, but it's not part of that economic process. So, you know, that's all I want to say about that. But also at the same time as capitalism depends upon this unpaid labour, it's also true that the low payment for women and the unpaid labour of women gives men power in families to access money. Men have the power to access money as wages if they're working men, you know, like employed, even professionals and so on. They have the power to access a lot more money as wages than women generally do. And of course, also as owners of the means of production, they have the power to access money as profits and so on. So this creates a cycle, right? Now okay, so there are a number of elements and they go around in a big circle and come back on each other, right? And this is how I look at it. Women are not paid for domestic work and they're paid less in employment. They're underrepresented in the labour market. It's only recently that they've come into the labour market in anything like huge numbers, right? Go back to 1960, 1970, even then it wasn't the case. what does this mean in families? It means women have less power in their families because the wage earner is the one with the economic power. You know, you can see this when women divorce and, you know, and they're a single mother or whatever, they're economically disadvantaged, and this is borne out by heaps of statistics, right? And what is this? What in you know, in heterosexual dual you know, couple families, whatever. What does this mean? It means that women have less power in their families, and that means that men can enforce a situation or kind of, you know, take advantage of a situation which is culturally endorsed, in which women do the lion's share of the housework and domestic work. And actually with children under 5, you know, in terms of the research of, oh no, I can't remember her name, but anyway, but in terms of, it can be up to 70 hours a week, and even if you do the time budget studies, which are sort of, you know, problematic in some ways, but there's a vast gap. Women are doing, actually combining their housework and their paid work, they're doing more hours of work than men. And men so what are men using this extra time for? Well, of course, they're using it for leisure and socializing with other men. Like, that can be seen as creating the patriarchal organization of society through, you know, cabals of men in pubs or whatever, you know, like, that's part of it. But also they are involved in the political games, you know, like the voluntary labor of men makes the political systems run. Or they spend vast amounts of time in their work, you know, like in running the economy through their contribution to work, you know, like as professionals, as business executives who are working a 60-hour week or whatever. All of these men are in a sense controlling society, right? And what's enabling them to do this? The fact that their wives at home are doing an unequal share of the domestic work. Why is that happening? Because men have power in families and can enforce this situation. Okay, so what's the effect on women? The effect on women is that they don't have the time to organise to change the rules of the political and economic game. They can't organise in unions to get more money in paid work. That's really difficult for them, because going out at night to organise union meetings, etc., isn't easy. They can't get the political power to demand free childcare. I mean, our parliaments are still dominated by men. It's hard for them to do something like to get a larger supporting parent payment, you know, like, in other words, so if they separate from their husband, they're stuffed. And so to change the political game, to make that possible for women, it requires a vast amount of political organisation that women don't have the time for, right? The last thing they can get is, like, you know, free money from the government, you know, wages for housework. You must be joking. And anyway, so I'll leave that with you now, and just say that, you know, there's this intersection between the way capitalism, the labour market, you know, is all structured, creates all these relationships to patriarchy and makes patriarchy possible within the context of a capitalist society. And what I'll remind you of is that this kind of structure of patriarchy is completely different to feudal society. Feudal society never operated in this way. It's capitalism that operates in this way. And I'm just talking now about the core economies, you know, the rich countries and so on. I'll talk in the next talk about the developing world and what went on there. Okay, thank you.